The night Faye Dunmore found out her best friend had taken everything: the promotion, the apartment lease, and the man she'd been planning a future with. She didn't cry. She went to the nearest bar, ordered the cheapest whiskey on the menu, and started doing the math on how much of her life she'd have to rebuild from scratch. The answer was, most of it. She'd been at Callaway and Reese Accounting for 6 years. 6 years of covering for Margot's late submissions, explaining Margot's math errors to clients, quietly fixing the forecasts Margot submitted under her own name. 6 years of being told she was indispensable, which, she now understood, was not the same thing as being valued. The senior partner position had opened in March. Faye had applied. Margot had applied 2 weeks later, using a client portfolio that was almost entirely Faye's work. Margot got the job on a Thursday. On Saturday morning, Faye found a text on Reed's phone. Reed, who she'd been with for 3 years, who she'd let move into her apartment, whose student loans she'd quietly helped pay down twice because he'd asked and she'd said yes, because that's what you do when you love someone. The text was from Margot. It had been going on since January, so by Saturday evening, Faye was sitting at the bar at the back of a hotel she couldn't really afford, nursing a whiskey she definitely couldn't afford, and doing what she always did when her life fell apart. She made a list. Things she had left, a sublet ending in 6 weeks, a savings account that would cover rent somewhere decent for about 4 months, a professional reputation that was apparently invisible to anyone with the authority to do something about it, a younger sister in Winnipeg who would tell her to move back home and mean it kindly and make Faye feel like she was 17 again, a job she could no longer walk into without wanting to put her head through a window, things she did not have, a plan. She was on her second whiskey, staring at the list on her phone with the particular exhaustion of someone who has held it together for too long, when the man sat down at the other end of the bar. She didn't notice him right away. She noticed the way the bartender straightened, the way the 2 men who'd been talking near the door suddenly found reasons to look elsewhere, the way the room didn't go quiet exactly, but changed, the way air changes before a storm, pressure dropping, something recalibrating. She looked up. He was older. Late 30s, maybe 40, maybe older still. The kind of age that's hard to read on a man who carries himself like he's never once been caught off guard. Dark jacket, no tie, a jaw that looked like it had been set at some point and healed slightly wrong. He was reading something on his phone, not looking at her, not looking at anyone, and somehow that was the most tension-commanding thing in the room. Faye looked back at her own phone, added to her list, stop noticing strangers in bars. Focus. The bartender, a young woman named, according to her name tag, Bree, came to take his order with the specific kind of deferential efficiency Faye had only ever seen directed at people who did not need to be told twice. He ordered something without looking up. Bree didn't ask him to repeat it. Faye drained her whiskey. She was reaching for her phone to close the notes app and figure out whether she could expense a cab home. She couldn't. She was no longer a senior associate as of this morning when she'd sent her resignation via email in a moment of scorched earth clarity. She was now 40% regretting when she heard it. Her name. Not her full name. Just Faye, said by someone on a phone somewhere behind her, the kind of casual professional mention that meant whoever was talking didn't know she was there. She turned, just slightly. 2 men in suits near the lobby entrance. One of them had his back to her. She could only hear fragments. The Dunmore file. Yes, Callaway said if she contests the attribution. She set her glass down very carefully. The Dunmore file. Her name. On a document that was, she was now understanding, currently being discussed in this hotel lobby by 2 men she did not recognize, regarding work that was apparently still being mined for value by the firm she had resigned from approximately 11 hours ago. She stood up. She wasn't sure what she was going to say. She crossed the bar in the direction of the lobby, turned the wrong way in the dim light, and walked directly into the man from the end of the bar. Not into him, exactly. She stopped. He stopped. She was close enough to see that his eyes were a specific shade of gray that looked like the same Lawrence in November, flat, very still, and not warm. "Sorry," she said. She stepped to the right. He stepped to the right. She stepped to the left. He didn't move. He was looking at her with an expression that was not unkind, but was also not anything else recognizable. He had a folder in his hand, an actual physical folder, the kind nobody carried anymore. "You're Faye Dunmore," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm nobody," she said, which was unhinged. She knew it was unhinged as it came out of her mouth, but the whiskey and the week and the lobby conversation and Margot's name on her work had done something to her usually functional filter. He looked at her for a moment. "That's not what the file says." She stared at him. "What file?" He opened the folder and held it out to her. She took it. She didn't know why she took it. She just did, and looked down at the first page. It was a contract, a very clean, very formal, extremely official-looking contract. The language was dense, but she read fast. She'd spent 6 years parsing documents written to obscure what they actually meant. This one was not trying to obscure. This one was surprisingly direct. Her name was on it, her credentials, a position described as Director of Internal Accounts, Harwick Consolidated Group, a salary that made her go briefly still, a term of 12 months, renewable, a clause about discretion. That was the first thing that made her look up. "What is Harwick Consolidated Group?" she said. "A holdings company," he said. "Holdings of what?" "Various interests." He paused. "Real estate, logistics, some financial services." The way he said financial services was the way her uncle used to say feeling fine when he was not feeling fine. She looked back at the contract. She looked up at him. "Who are Harwick?" he said. "Just that. Not I'm Mr. Harwick or my name is, just the word, like it was a fact about the room rather than a fact about him. "And you want to hire me," she said. "Tonight, in a bar, with a folder. Your firm forwarded your resignation letter to 3 of your former clients this afternoon," he said. "Accidentally," they said. "I doubt that." Her stomach dropped. "One of them is a client of mine," he continued. "He forwarded it to me. He included your audit summary from last quarter, the one filed under your colleague's name. Margot, you did that work," he said. "It was not a question either. I can't discuss confidential. I'm not asking you to confirm it," he said. "I've already confirmed it. The methodology in that audit is consistent with work you submitted under your own name in 2021 and 2022. The error rate is also consistent. Your colleague's independent work has a different error rate." He said it the way you'd state the weather. "No malice. Just numbers. I need someone who can do what you do. I need them to start Monday." Faye looked down at the contract again. She thought about Margot's face when she'd gotten the senior partner news. That careful, practiced sympathy. "I hope you know it wasn't personal, Faye." She thought about Reed's student loans. She thought about the sublet ending in 6 weeks and the 4 months of savings and her sister in Winnipeg saying, "Just come home," with that gentle, terrible kindness. She thought about the salary on this contract, which was more than she'd made in any 2 years of her career. She thought about the discretion clause. She thought, this is either the best decision or the worst decision, and both of those options are more interesting than moving back to Winnipeg. She signed the contract. She used the pen he offered without being asked. A plain pen, not expensive, which was somehow the detail that unsettled her most. He took the folder back. He looked at her for a moment with those flat grey eyes. "Monday," he said, 8 a.m. The address is on page 3. Then he walked away. Faye stood in the bar of a hotel she couldn't afford, holding a whiskey she'd already paid for, and thought, what did I just do? The address on page 3 was in a part of downtown Montreal that real estate listings described as transitional, and which Faye privately described as conspicuously unassuming for the amount of money that clearly moved through it. The building had no signage. The lobby had no reception desk. A man in a grey suit met her at the door at 7:58 a.m., said his name was Cutler, and walked her to the 11th floor without once making eye contact. Her office. She had an office, an actual office, not an open-plan cubicle with a frosted divider, had a window that faced west and a desk that was completely clear except for 3 external hard drives and a handwritten note that said, "The Aldrin file. Start there. Do not discuss with anyone outside this floor. H." She stared at the note for a while. Then she plugged in the first hard drive. The Aldrin file was, to put it plainly, a disaster. Not a fraud disaster. She was fairly certain, by the end of Tuesday, that she was not looking at anything deliberately criminal, which was either reassuring or its own specific category of unsettling. What she was looking at was a financial structure that had clearly been designed by 4 different people who had never spoken to each other, layered over many years, and then handed to a series of accountants who had each addressed the visible problem in front of them without looking at what was underneath. She spent Tuesday making notes, Wednesday building a map. Thursday she found the thing that none of the previous 4 accountants had found, a recurring discrepancy in the logistics subsidiary, not large enough to flag automated systems, but consistent, patterned, and when you traced it back far enough, clearly intentional. Someone inside Aldrin was skimming, had been for at least 3 years. She sat back in her chair and looked at her map for a long time. At 5 p.m. Harwick appeared in her doorway. She had not seen him since the bar. She was aware, in a peripheral way she refused to examine, that she had thought about his grey eyes more than once in the intervening 4 days. She was choosing to attribute this to stress and displacement rather than anything else. He looked at her desk, the printed maps, the color-coded timeline, the 3 pages of flagged transactions, and said nothing for a moment. "There's a person skimming from Aldrin's logistics account," she said. "Has been since 2021. The amount is just under the automated flag threshold each time, which means it's not opportunistic. Someone taught them exactly where the ceiling was." He looked at her. "That implies someone with detailed knowledge of your audit parameters," she added. "Yes," he said. "It does." "A beat. Is there someone on this floor?" she said. He didn't answer immediately, which was itself an answer of a kind. "No," he said. "Not anymore." She nodded. She looked back at her map. "I can give you a full report by end of next week. Dates, amounts, pattern analysis. Probably enough to determine exactly who." "I already know who," he said. She looked up. "I needed the documentation," he said. "Formal, traceable. The kind that could be handed to lawyers or, if necessary, to other parties and be considered unimpeachable." "Other parties," she said carefully. He said nothing, but he looked at her with those November eyes, and she understood, in the particular way that she'd always been able to read the thing underneath the numbers, that other parties did not mean the CRA. She should have been alarmed. She was alarmed. She was also, and this was the part she chose not to examine, not surprised. "Okay," he said. He left. She went back to the hard drive. She did not ask herself why a holdings company needed unimpeachable documentation for purposes beyond the tax authorities. She had signed a discretion clause. She was a professional. She was also, this was the part she did examine later, in her too small sublet, someone who had spent 6 years making sure other people's work was unimpeachable and had nothing to show for it. At least here, the work would be hers. She told herself that was enough. She was not entirely sure she believed it. The 3rd week, she met the rest of the 11th floor. There weren't many of them. Cutler handled logistics and security and appeared to run on approximately 4 hours of sleep and something deeply unpleasant about the world that he kept to himself. A woman named Bex managed communications, and by communications, Faye was learning she meant the specific kind of communication that required both encryption and deniability. A man who was only ever introduced as Laurent handled things that nobody explained to Faye and that she had the instinct not to ask about. And then there was the meeting. She wasn't invited to it. She was in the kitchen getting coffee at 8:15 on a Thursday morning when 3 men she'd never seen walked off the elevator and into the boardroom at the end of the hall without being stopped by anyone, which meant they were expected, which meant Cutler knew who they were, which meant they were not strangers. She went back to her office. She looked at the Aldrin report on her desk, finished, clean, 12 pages, the kind of document she was quietly proud of. 15 minutes later, she heard something from the direction of the boardroom that was not an argument exactly, but was adjacent to one. A raised voice. Not Harwick's, his she wouldn't have expected, but someone else's, carrying that particular pitch of a man who is used to being the loudest person in a room and is encountering resistance. Then quiet. Then Harwick's voice. She couldn't make out the words. Just the tone, level, unhurried, the conversational equivalent of a door being closed, then more quiet. The three men left 11 minutes later. She watched them walk past her open office door. One of them glanced in. He had the look of someone who was trying to figure out what she was. She looked back at her laptop. She understood by now more than she'd understood in week 1. Harwick Consolidated was not exactly a holdings company, or it was, but the holdings included things that weren't on any public registry. The logistics subsidiary that she'd spent weeks auditing moved physical goods in quantities and across borders in patterns that, if you looked at them the way she looked at them, told a story. Not necessarily an illegal story, she kept reminding herself. She was not naive enough to think that legal and illegal were the only two categories that existed in the world she was now working in. But she was also not stupid enough to pretend she didn't know what she was looking at. She knocked on his office door at noon. "The Aldrin report is done," she said. "There's something else." He looked up from his desk, waiting. "The logistics patterns," she said. "I wasn't looking at them as part of the Aldrin file, but when I was building the discrepancy map, I started noticing. The shipment volumes don't match the declared values. Not in the Aldrin account specifically. More broadly." She put the spreadsheet on his desk. "Here, these 3 corridors, the declared value is about 60% of what the movement volume suggests." He looked at the spreadsheet. He looked at her. "You went looking," he said. "I wasn't looking," she said. "I was mapping," it appeared. A pause. "Are you going to be a problem?" he said. Not threatening, genuinely asking. She thought about that. "I don't think so," she said. "I think I'm someone who needs to understand what I'm documenting. I'm not going to document something I don't understand. I'm not going to hand you a report that has a gap in it because I was politely avoiding a question." He looked at her for a long time. "The 60% gap," he said finally, "is where certain arrangements are made that fall outside Aldrin's declared scope but inside ours." "Okay," she said. "You're not going to ask what the arrangements are." "I'm going to assume," she said, "that if you wanted me to know, you would have told me in week 1. Something happened in his face. Not quite a smile. The shadow of one, maybe, or whatever lives in the same neighborhood. "That's correct," he said. "Then I'll note the gap as a known variance and flag it as outside my audit scope," she said. "Which is technically accurate. Technically accurate," he repeated. "It's what accountants do," she said. She picked up the spreadsheet and left. She told herself she was fine. She told herself she was a professional navigating an unusual workplace. She told herself that everyone who had ever worked for anyone had encountered things they'd chosen not to examine too closely, and this was simply a more explicit version of that universal condition. She also told herself, lying in her sublet at 11 p.m. looking at the ceiling, that the reason she kept replaying the conversation was purely professional. She needed to know where she stood. That was all. The 4th week, someone tried to access her computer while she was at lunch. She knew because she had a habit, developed over 6 years of watching Margot borrow things, of setting a small visual tell, a specific file open in a specific position, before she left her desk for more than 10 minutes. When she came back, the file was closed. She said nothing. She opened her laptop. She spent the afternoon working normally. She also quietly pulled her access logs, her credentials. Between 12:15 and 12:40. She sat with that for a day. She knocked on Harwick's door at 8 a.m. on a Wednesday. She put the access log on his desk without preamble. He read it. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in the quality of his stillness. "When did you find this?" he said. "Yesterday," she said. "I waited to be sure I was reading it correctly." "You are. Is this related to the Aldrin situation?" "Possibly," he said. He looked up at her. "Are you frightened?" She thought about that honestly. "I'm angry," she said. "Someone tried to use my credentials. If they'd succeeded, anything they accessed would trace back to me." "Yes," he said. "So whoever it was wanted documentation that looked like it came from inside my audit scope." "Yes. That's actually more alarming than a direct threat," she said. "A direct threat means someone wants to stop me. This means someone wants to use me." He looked at her. "You understand this world fairly quickly," he said. "I grew up watching people take credit for things they didn't do. she said. "You learn the shapes." He was quiet for a moment, then, "You should have a second office. Different floor, different name on the lease. Do your sensitive work there. You're not going to tell me who tried to access it." "Not yet," she nodded. She picked up the log. "When you know," she said. "I'd like to be told." "Why?" he said. Not dismissive, genuinely curious. "Because it affects how I structure my documentation going forward," she said. "If it's someone inside, I need to know what they were looking for. If it's someone outside, I need to know how they got credentials to attempt it." He held her gaze. "Those are both correct reasons." "They are." He almost smiled again. She was starting to be able to see the shape of it now. The slight shift around the mouth, the way his eyes didn't go warmer exactly, but became more present. "I'll tell you," he said. She left. The second office was in a building 7 blocks away. Same floor plan, smaller. A window facing an alley. Faye found she liked it better. There were no visits from men with the expressions of people filing things away about her. Nobody walked past. It was the kind of space where you could think without the ambient awareness of being thought about in return. She worked there most mornings and came to the main office in the afternoons. On a Tuesday in the 5th week, Harwick was there when she arrived. He wasn't waiting for her. He had a chair pulled to the small table by the window and was working through something on paper. Actual paper, handwritten, and he looked up when she came in with the mild alertness of someone who heard everything and reacted to almost nothing. "You could have called," she said. "I needed to think," he said. This was convenient. She sat down at her desk. She opened her laptop. She was aware, in the specific way she'd been trying not to be aware of things, that the room was very small and he was very present in it. "The access attempt," he said without looking up from his paper. "It was Croft." She stopped typing. Croft was the name of the man who'd glanced into her office the day of the boardroom meeting. She'd learned in the weeks since that he ran the external logistics for a set of Harwick's arrangements, the part that touched the 60% gap. "He was looking for my corridor analysis," she said. "Yes, he wanted to know what I'd found. He wanted to know if you were going to be a liability," Harwick said. "To him specifically, because what I found implicates him." "In part." She turned her chair to face him. He was still looking at his paper. She looked at the side of his face, the jaw that had healed slightly wrong, a scar she could see now running just below his left ear, barely visible. "What happens to him?" she said. "Nothing good," Harwick said. "That's not your concern." "It is when my credentials are part of the picture." He looked up, those grey eyes direct. "It's been handled," he said. "Your name is not attached to anything he did or will do." "You cleared it," she said, "before telling me." "Yes, that was," she paused. "Actually, that was efficient. Thank you. I protect what's mine," he said. The room was very quiet. She turned back to her laptop. She told herself the way he'd said what's mine was strictly organizational. An asset, a professional resource. The way you'd protect a good accountant who had useful knowledge and clean methodology. She almost believed it. "Harwick," she said. "Yes. Why was I actually hired?" He was quiet for a moment. "You were hired because your work is the best I've seen at this level," he said, "and because someone was already using it without your knowledge or permission. That bothered me." She turned to look at him. "It bothered you," she said. "It was inefficient," he said. "The credit should sit with the labor. It's how you keep the incentive structure intact." He paused. "Also, yes, it bothered me." She looked at him for a long moment. "That might be the most direct thing you've said to me," she said. "I prefer direct," he said. "Most people can't handle it. I'm not most people." "No," he said. "You're not." She turned back to her laptop. He went back to his paper. They worked in silence for an hour and a half, which was the most comfortable Faye had felt in a room with another person in longer than she could easily account for. She found the second layer in week 6. She hadn't been looking for it. She had not, as she told herself firmly, been looking for anything beyond the scope of the Aldrin follow-up. But the follow-up required cross-referencing transaction windows, and cross-referencing transaction windows led her, by the cold logic of numbers rather than any intention, to a pattern that had nothing to do with Croft or the 60% gap or any of the things she'd been told to look at. This one was older, the amounts were larger, and unlike the Croft situation, which was petty in its way, one man skimming for himself, this was structural. This had been designed. She printed 12 pages. She triple-checked everything. She sat with it for 2 days. Then she went to his office and closed the door behind her, which she'd never done before. He looked up. She put the 12 pages on his desk. He read. He didn't speak. She watched his face and learned almost nothing from it, which she had come to understand was its own kind of information. The things he didn't let show were the things that mattered most. He reached the last page. He set it down. "How long?" he said. "The earliest transaction I can trace it to is 7 years ago," she said. "But the methodology is consistent. I think it's older. Who else has seen this?" "No one." He looked at her. "You printed it here. I printed it on the isolated system in the second office," she said. "The one that's not networked." His eyes stayed on hers. "You thought about that before you printed?" "I think about everything before I do it," she said. "It's actually quite exhausting." He didn't smile, but the almost smile was there, deeper now. "This is going to require some time to address," he said. "I know. During that time," he said, "I would prefer you to stay in the second office as your primary location. Not because you're in danger. Because I'd like to limit who knows you found this, and when it's addressed," she said. "Then I'll tell you what I can," he said. She nodded. She picked up the pages. He held out his hand. "Leave them," he said. She looked at him. "I'll destroy them when I've done what I need to do with them," he said. "You keep the methodology. Keep the source data. Don't write a report yet." She handed him the 12 pages. Their fingers overlapped briefly on the paper. Neither of them moved for a second. She let go. She went to the door. "Faye," she turned. He was looking at her with an expression she didn't have a name for yet, like he was calculating something that wasn't about money. "You could have walked away from this," he said. 3 times now. "You didn't." "I know," she said. "Why?" She thought about it. She thought about Margot's face, about 6 years of invisible labor, about the feeling for the first time in her career of sitting in a room where her work mattered and her name was on it, and nobody was going to quietly reassign the credit the moment she left. "The work is real here," she said, "whatever it is. And I'm not asking it's real. My part of it is real. That's more than I had before." He held her gaze. "It is," he said. She left. She walked the 7 blocks back to the second office in the early November cold, Montreal grey above her and the river somewhere beyond the buildings, and she thought about the contract she'd signed in a bar on the worst night of a very bad year. She thought about what's mine. She thought about grey eyes in a small room, and the almost smile that had been appearing with increasing frequency, and the way he'd said it bothered me like the admission cost him something, but he'd made the calculation and decided it was worth it. She thought, this is not a safe situation. This is not a straightforward situation. This is a man who deals in things she would be foolish to romanticize and wise to take seriously, she thought, and still. She unlocked the door of the second office. She sat down at her desk. She opened her laptop and pulled up the source data, clean, precise, entirely hers, and started building the next layer of the map. Outside, the city moved around her, ordinary and indifferent, the way cities are when your life is shifting in ways you don't yet have words for. She worked until 9. She took the metro home. She lay in her sublet, looking at the ceiling with the particular calm of someone who has stopped fighting the current and started reading it instead. She did not call Margot. She did not call Reed. She did not call her sister in Winnipeg. She thought about Monday morning, about 8 a.m., about the second office and the source data, and the man 7 blocks away who had, by some logic she didn't fully understand yet, decided she was worth protecting. She thought, there are worse calculations to be part of. She turned off the light. For the first time in 6 weeks, she slept before midnight.